Now, Iran and the P5+1 have agreed to implement the Geneva deal over Tehran's nuclear energy program from January the 20th. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says once Iran begins to implement the deal, the other side will begin to ease sanctions on Tehran. Araghchi says the other side will release $4.2 billion in Iranian frozen assets. This, he says, will take place in 8 stages. In return, Araghchi said Iran will oxidize its 20% enriched uranium within a year. Araghchi said the two sides will proceed to implement the Geneva deal in a balanced way. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister says Tehran is also ready to allow the IAEA to verify the implementation of the Geneva deal. Meanwhile, Iran's senior nuclear negotiator has warned against any new U.S. sanctions against Tehran. Abbas Araghchi says if the U.S. Congress approves new sanctions, the Geneva deal will be cancelled. He also noted that Iran will never negotiate under pressure. Araghchi said the maximum time to reach the final step is 1 year. He also noted that it is likely to take another step before the final agreement. The senior nuclear negotiator said it is not possible to talk about a final agreement with certainty now. He added that a final agreement might not be made and Tehran's nuclear activities may continue like before. Joining us now from Boston via satellite is author and political scientist Kaveh Afrasiabi. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Afrasiabi. Now, first of all, we do know that there is a lot of pressure on the Obama administration from the U.S. Congress, from Zionist lobbies within America to let this legislation pass in Congress that will impose fresh sanctions on Iran. What does that mean for A, the implementation of this agreement between the P5+1 and Iran, and B, on reaching a final agreement in the long run?
Well, just as Mr. Araghchi rightly said, if this legislation is passed and President Obama has threatened to veto it, but if in case there is an override of his veto, which I find to be unlikely at this point, then that would amount to being a deal breaker, and Iran has threatened to stop negotiating in light of a new sanctions bill that is prohibited by the terms of the Geneva Agreement. So in my opinion, this was a pivotal moment this week in negotiations for the implementation of the Geneva Agreement, and there's a consensus among the P5+1 that this deal should go forward, and this is an auspicious development that I think adds a new lease of life to the momentum for further negotiations toward final status, and by the same token take some of the momentum away from the opponents of this agreement, whether it be the members of the U.S. Congress or the Zionist lobby.
Right now, speaking of a final long-term comprehensive agreement, even John Kerry, the U.S. Secretary of State, has said that difficulties do lie ahead in coming up with one. What difficulties do you see and major obstacles in reaching an agreement?
Well, you know, there are difficulties even in getting this deal off the ground, and every time these parties get back together and negotiate, I think that's a step forward. It builds confidence, it adds depth to the process, and it resolves some issues, and therefore it facilitates the process. So we have to have a process-oriented approach whereby all these various hurdles, whether they're technical, legal, and so forth, can be resolved one by one. Of course, one of the main obstacles is the political opposition in the U.S. Congress that may or may not materialize in the form of a new anti-Iran sanction, but there are a number of others. The new bill, the pending bill in the U.S. Congress, also foresees the dismantling of the Iranian enrichment infrastructure, which goes against the heart of the Geneva Agreement that recognizes Iran's right to enrich. So, you know, there are a lot of political, technical, and other issues that need to be sorted out in the months to come.
Okay, we're going to wait and see how this pans out. Author and political scientist Kaveh Afrasiabi there, joining us from Boston. Mr. Afrasiabi, it's always a pleasure having you with us here on Press TV.